Good afternoon, Michael Malice here. Let that be your welcome for the next hour. We have with us a guest who has literally been years in the making, Dr. Geoffrey Miller. We've been talking about this ever since I think I was at Compound trying to get you in studio. That hadn't happened. However, last week I was at Tucker Max's ranch, who you used to work with, and I'm like, wait a minute, let me hit him up. So we have a lot to cover today. So there's like four big topics. So first of all, you're an evolutionary psychologist. Your most recent book, which is a collection of essays, was called Virtue Signaling. Previously, you co-authored a book with Tucker called Mate, about becoming a mate selection, things like that. You also have the dubious privilege of being one of the first academics to be canceled. And you're also one of the world authorities from an academic perspective on the concept of polyamory. Now, one of the things I do want to discuss with you is you are a doctor, Dr. Geoffrey Miller, right?
A PhD at least.
Well, I'm curious since evolutionary psychology teaches so much that human beings are maybe incessantly engaged in status seeking and ways to kind of rise in the hierarchies. Often these behaviors are unintentional otherwise. What is your perspective on the brouhaha about the insistence of Jill Biden being referred to as Dr. Biden?
It's super cringe. I mean, I don't know any academics who have like self-respect and a successful academic career and actually do research and teaching who insist on being called doctor by like ordinary civilians anywhere outside the academic context. Like even within, my psychology department, you kind of forgive like newly minted PhDs. Like if they're a postdoc and they just got their PhD like a year ago and they want to be called doctor, it's like, okay, that's fine. Like your ego needs, for validation, like fair enough. But if you're like a few years post PhD, then I think that kind of focus on academic credentials is pretty cringe. And I've been very critical of credentialism in general in academia. I was just reading economist Brian Kaplan's book, The Case Against Education.
Oh, he's great.
Which is very compelling and very radical, and more people should read it. And in my book, Spent, from 2008, I also had a whole chapter kind of critiquing academic credentialism and saying, it's largely signaling, largely a waste of time, and not probably a good investment of societal resources.
It seems that it's almost entirely signaling, because apologies to you, but from my experience, the experience of people I know, a huge chunk of academics are really marginally intelligent, unimpressive people, and having credentials is one of the few ways that they can kind of, come off as impressive.
Your mileage may vary. I mean, I love academics. I get along with them. I've spent my whole life around them. And a lot of them they're way brighter than average. Like
Okay.
if you actually mean like statistically average, IQ 100, most academics with PhDs are IQ 125, 130 plus. Like they're in the top. Absolutely. You can't get a PhD in a science that requires quantitative thinking, right? Unless you're probably at least IQ 120.
Okay.
Like setting aside affirmative action issues, but you need to be pretty smart. The issue now is, if you're the kind of very smart person who might have aspired to become an academic back in the 80s, like I did, would you go into academia at the moment? Probably not. No, you'd go work for some crypto startup, big tech, something with huge upside potential. You wouldn't necessarily go into research.
Well, that's interesting, because this is a big discussion. Have things gotten worse, or is it that we're just more aware of them than previously? So your position is, in your lifetime, things have gotten significantly worse. Can you speak on that, please?
Yeah, particularly in the last, I would say 5 to 8 years, the kind of woke takeover of the American Academy it's palpable. It's like everywhere. It's triumphalist, right? The people who support the woke ideology in most departments, most universities, know that they have won. They have captured the academy, and they're starting to throw their weight around and, make a lot of demands that they would not have made like 5 or 10 years ago. and the level of kind of overt hostility to, not just sort of white males and not just against meritocracy or sort of traditional academic values, but even the hostility against a lot of specific research and a lot of specific sciences, like a lot of the stuff I do, hostility to evolutionary psychology, against IQ testing, against behavior genetics, or any study of like nature, not just nurture, has become pretty taboo, right? And you will get in trouble if you try to teach that stuff. You will get undergrads complaining to administrators saying, I'm offended, I'm triggered. This, guy should not be teaching that there are two sexes and that there are biological sex differences in a class. So people outside the academy might not understand just how radically different this is compared to previous decades. It's not just an American problem, but we're sort of on the vanguard of this revolution.
Well, it's interesting that you said vanguard, because vanguardism was a big part of Lenin's ideology. So it seems to me that you're saying that, I don't want to be Kathy Newman here, that this idea that human beings are basically plasticine from birth, that any kind of genetics that feeds into that should be either downplayed or just attacked, and that if we get the right structure in place and the right education in place, we can create an egalitarian society. That seems, are you saying that that is basically taken as a given in the mindset of academia at large in America?
Yeah, totally. I mean, look, back in 2001, Steve Pinker from Harvard published The Blank Slate, which is a great critique of that kind of blank slate reasoning that says anybody can be anything, it's all nurture, all disparities are due to discrimination, oppression, parenting, etc. And it was a very compelling argument back then, it still is, but that blank slate ideology really has taken over. It is the default view. If you deviate from it, particularly when you're talking about anything socially relevant, politically relevant, you will very quickly get ostracized. And it's so woven into the fabric of a lot of the social sciences, economics, psychology, political science, that anybody who questions it is suspected of being like far right white nationalist.
Yeah,
Like, why would you ever doubt the blank slate view unless you have some
right.
extreme right axe to grind? And so it's, if you even say, oh, this is interesting, here's a behavioral trait that's heritable according to twin and adoption studies, people are immediately thinking, you fucking Nazi. It's kind of gotten to that point.
Oh, it's Mengele studied twins too, that kind of thing. How do they, I know this might not be necessarily your area of expertise, how do they reconcile the argument, which was not that long ago, that people are born gay? It seems that idea is incompatible with the idea that basically we're born plasticine and can be molded in whatever context people desire.
It is very striking to me because I went to college and grad school in the 80s, and a big turning point in the gay rights movement, which I was, following carefully, because like you go to college in New York in the mid 80s with the AIDS crisis, and gay rights is like a central social issue. Around the late 80s, early 90s, the gay rights organizations adopted this more biological view of sexual orientation that said you're born gay, born that way, as Lady Gaga says.
Right.
And that became a major way to convince people in the 90s to support gay rights. People aren't choosing this. It's not a degenerate lifestyle. It's not just sinful. It's an intrinsic part of your sexual orientation. So in that domain, genes are okay. But in most other domains, genes are considered kind of evil. So it's weird. It's like gay genes are good, all other genes bad. And I don't think the people who believe in the blank slate are particularly strong or systematic thinkers. Like they don't even notice these inconsistencies.
And also, if you're pointing it out, you must therefore be a Nazi homophobe.
Yeah, or these days, if you claim sexual orientation is partly genetic or biological, then that's also viewed as transphobic somehow.
Wow.
In
Okay.
ways I don't quite understand, but it's seen as sort of a challenge to trans activism.
Yeah, there's this thing. A good friend of mine, Blair White, I've had her on the show. She's a trans woman, and there's this movement in trans culture where if you are someone who says being transgender means being diagnosed with gender dysphoria, they have some slur for it. But to say that it's a mental condition that requires being looked at as a medical condition, that is somehow wrong. And I don't know what the alternative to regarding transgenderism as gender dysphoria would be, as opposed to like, well, but because they won't say, well, I woke up and decided to be a female either. They'll say, this is who I am. So those are two other concepts that seem to be irreconcilable to me.
The notable thing now is there's a kind of woke tax that's imposed on research in the sense that a lot of academics I know in the behavioral sciences have to put an enormous amount of time and energy and care into how they write about their findings
Okay.
and how they frame issues in order not to be offensive. And they actually often end up putting more time into not being offensive than like into the actual data analysis and writing it up and paying attention to the science. That's how heavy the the burden of this ideology has become. And it really slows down science. It makes it so, not just certain fields are taboo, but certain specific patterns of findings might be considered taboo. And if you publish them, then, your own grad students will complain to heads of department or to administrators, or you'll kind of get blacklisted so you don't get any further research grants, or your promotion and tenure will be delayed, or there's a lot of blowback that can happen.
Is it, I'm very, very fortunate that I get to be self-employed. This is something I thank God every day that I have enough of an audience and support that I don't have to have a boss. We don't have to get into details necessarily, but how frustrating is it for you or people who think like you, who are obviously very intelligent, committed to finding the truth wherever it might lead them, looking at things that maybe other people don't, to have to kowtow to bureaucrats who just have an agenda, and that agenda is not at all truth seeking or human flourishing?
It's enormously frustrating. It's why, a lot of professors I know are sort of, if a bright undergrad comes to them and says, I loved your classes, I love research, I love psychology or economics or whatever, should I go to grad school? Should I get a PhD? A lot of us are kind of steering the brightest students away from that path and saying, here's what you can expect if you do that
Yeah,
in America in the 2020s. Maybe not the best use of your time. And there are alternative paths. I know a lot of people get their PhDs and then go into industry, or they
sure.
become podcasters and they write blogs and they write for, Quillette or whatever. The level of frustration you can see from the fact that, when University of Austin, this new startup university, was announced,
Yeah.
right? The president is Pano Canalos. As soon as it got some press, they got allegedly like 4,000 professors applying to work
Holy
there,
crap. Wow.
just emailing saying, please, this sounds great. Any university that supports free speech, heterodox thinking, viewpoint diversity, that actually values free inquiry and serious education. People are dying for this. And I think we don't just need like one University of Austin, we need like 50 of these. And it would be so easy to attract really high quality faculty, like very quickly. There's so many people ready to jump ship.
Guys, I'm really happy to promote Fume, which is one of the best mechanisms out there to help you quit smoking and help you quit vaping. What is Fume? Fume is a natural inhaler designed for a better, safer way to quit cigarettes. There's no smoke, there's no vape. It's made out of wood, Canadian maple. And they use these cores infused with plant oils that are studied to help curb cravings. It helps you replace that hand to mouth motion that so many smokers are addicted to. That ritual is part of the addiction, and it makes it harder to quit cold turkey. Fume helps with the quitting process, and they have support beyond quitting with over a dozen cores for relaxation, for energy, and more. Think about how much money you're spending on cigarettes. Think about how much your clothes smell, what it does to your teeth, what it does to your health. Fume helps you with all that, and I'm very, very happy to be able to promote them. All you got to do is go to breathefume.com, breathefum.com/malice, and use code malice. You get 10% off. This is a great way to get your health back in order. They were from Canada, and they've helped over 50,000 customers around the world. You owe it to yourself and to your family to find a replacement for smoking that will make it easy to stick to not wasting money on that awful, awful tobacco. Quit naturally with Fume and use Malice to save 10% at breathefume.com/malice. And you'll be thanking me, I promise. Folks, your health is being bought and sold to the highest bidder. Lobbyists are fighting to make sure they don't have competition and you won't have options. That's where Crowd Health comes in. Crowd Health helps put your healthcare decisions back in your hands, saving you money and cutting out the middleman. It's not insurance. It's what insurance should be. And that's why it works. There's no deductibles. There's no networks. There's no copays. You see any doctor you want. You pay the first $500 and you submit any bills from there. The Crowd Health community takes care of the rest. It's a new way to pay for healthcare without premiums or deductibles or surprises. All you got to do is you pay one low monthly total to fund your account. It's less than $200 a month for most people. 100% of your contribution directly funds and reduces the healthcare cost of the community. You're not limited by doctor networks. They succeed by keeping its members happy. They help members shop for great care at a fair price. They make payments to doctors as quickly as possible. And they, Crowd Health, negotiates on the community's behalf when unexpected bills arise, which reverses those incentives that gets the healthcare system into this mess in the first place. Stop paying health insurance companies your hard-earned dollars. Go to joincrowdhealth.com now. Experience freedom of health insurance. Right now, your first 6 months, just $99 a month, almost 50% off the normal price, and a lot less than a high-deductible healthcare plan. Just go to joincrowdhealth.com and use promo code WELCOME at sign up. That's joincrowdhealth.com, promo code WELCOME. Crowd Health is not health insurance. It's a totally different way of paying for healthcare. Terms and conditions may apply. Let's get back to the show. It's interesting that you say like heterodox thinking, because that might apply to something like, okay, FDR knew Pearl Harbor was happening, or, some kind of out there things. But think of the concept that, behaviors are heritable, or, genes play more part in our psychological and behaviors than we would like to think. These are things that the layman would regard as not only not heterodox, but just absurdly obvious and patently true. So it's just fascinating that what you would describe as heterodox in an academic setting are things that most people, even most learned people in any other context, no matter where they're on the political spectrum, would regard as just so beyond dispute as to be absurd to question otherwise.
It's a very weird situation where it's almost like, if you teach anything in a psychology class to undergrads, where they could turn around and go back to their parents and say, this is what I was taught. If the parents agree with what was taught, that's taken as like prima facie evidence that the teacher is a fascist, right? If you're teaching anything where the parents would go, oh, that's very interesting, like they talk about the origin of sex differences, or isn't it interesting, this professor goes, general intelligence is somewhat heritable, right? It's almost like a way of creating a generation gap, right? Of creating a Gen Z who's happy to take the parents' money to pay tuition, room,
Right.
and board, but where it's almost like the education is designed to alienate them from their parents' views or from the common sense of our civilization as a whole.
Well, I mean, I think that kind of let's ties back to evolutionary psychology, because this is something that cults use very effectively, which is the idea, and this has been going on, since the Eleusinian mysteries in Greece and even previous, where if you are being initiated into some secret arcana about the nature of reality, first of all, you're objectively a step above everybody else. And secondly, it's appropriate to regard these kind of in that context, blue-pilled people as innocent, naive, or stupid, or downright malevolent because they're oblivious to the truths which you've now received, and is your job to kind of, be the leader of the future. So I think it very much also ties into young people's need to feel self-important and to feel better than their parents. I've made this comment on Twitter many times where I tell people, you don't hate Trump, you hate dad. So, it kind of does speak to that. And this is very clever on their part, no?
I think that's a great analogy. It really is like a cult driving a wedge between young
Yeah.
people and their parents, their extended family, their culture, and saying everything you were taught up until this point
Yeah, right.
is delusional bullshit. And if you take our sacrament and adopt our viewpoint, you can be saved.
Right.
Um, of course, with white students, it's largely a matter of instilling a lot of racial guilt about being white.
Or claimed racial guilt.
Yeah, sort of trying to impose a lot of racial guilt, but then giving them the out of saying,
Yes.
but if you're an ally, if you fess up, if you overcome your white fragility, if you adopt some new sexual orientation or identity, then you can be saved and you can become like the elite within the cult.
Yeah.
So it's very manipulative, and I think to some degree what happens is if young people can no longer expect to do better than their parents economically, they need something to feel
Right.
superior about. Like, where do you get that? You kind of have to get it from ideology if you can't get it from an improved standard of living. And in
Um,
countries that are getting richer quickly, like China, you don't see this kind of thing. The young people are confident, like, I am going to be richer than my
yeah.
parents or my grandparents, so I don't need to differentiate myself politically.
And it also must make the person look, this comes even for animals where the young buck tries to take on the alpha male, right? To try to take over the herd, the pack or whatever. But it also is, if I'm kind of schooled in this world of, non-binary gender, and mom and dad have never even heard these terms, right away, if I'm having an argument with them, they're starting at 1, I'm at a 50, so I'm going to mop the floor with them because they're not even going to be familiar with the language I'm using, literally.
Yeah, exactly. So another sort of mark of a cult is that you change the language and
Right.
you have a sort of insider vocabulary. And how can you tell when you're in a cult? Because the emphasis is more on the precision of using the new vocabulary
Yeah.
than of establishing like any empirical basis for any claims that you're making, right? So if the young people can dismiss everything that their parents say because the parents are like using the wrong terms, like, that's a mark of a cult.
And also you can make mom and dad feel stupid because they don't know your terms.
Yeah.
This is how they caught some like communist agents, either in West Germany or in America, I forget which, because they found some girl and she was insisting knows nothing about it, but she was using very specific communist jargon, and that tripped her up because any group or any ideology is going to use certain phrases. If you talk about taxation is theft, you right away out that
Yeah.
person as a libertarian. So it's kind of it's both the way, in evolutionary psychology talks a lot about this. Humans use signals to communicate with one another. You want to, especially if you're kind of this underground kind of group, you want to be able to pass in broader culture where being outed would, it's a camouflage. If I'm spotted, it's going to be bad for me, but I still have camouflaged animals still have to spot each other. So it's this kind of dance between like, how do I find my mate or my cohorts, but at the same time evade predators? It's the exact same thing in a human
Yeah.
context.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I think one unfortunate side effect of Gen Z developing this kind of highly ideological in-group language is that it makes it really hard to do what's called code switching, which is like
Yeah.
slightly switching dialect or how you talk about things with anybody outside the in-group. And this is really handicapping. Like, if you can't code switch so you can talk to Gen X business people who might hire you, and you can only talk Gen Z woke vocab, you'll instantly mark yourself out as not just highly indoctrinated, but highly inflexible and highly unempathic. Like if
Yeah.
you know, unable to actually relate to people, maybe who dropped out of high school or like didn't go to elite colleges or are actually from other cultures or other countries. One thing I've written about in Quillette is I did a piece called The Cultural Diversity Case for Free Speech that highlighted the problems of, hey, what if you're, you know, a student who comes to one of these American campuses from China or Nigeria or Norway or Russia, and you haven't absorbed the woke ideology? You face an absolute minefield, right? That is very exclusionary, where it's like, oh, if you didn't go undergrad to America and soak up all this vocabulary, then you're going to say all kinds of wrong things in your graduate seminar and get into all kinds of trouble and have all the wrong views. So it's actually very anti-diversity in the sense that it's, you know, extremely unwelcoming to anybody from other countries.
Your last book was called Virtue Signaling, collection of essays. One of the things I hate, jargon also serves a purpose. If something didn't have a purpose, humans would be doing it for the most part. I do hate when terms that have a very specific meaning reach the mainstream, become watered down and completely meaningless. Can you define to people what virtue signaling means and how it's used?
When I use virtue signaling, it just means trying to show off your moral virtues to others. And you can do that well or badly. You can do it in a way that's sort of cheap and easy to fake, like cheap talk, where you just say, like, I believe this, but you don't actually do anything about it. Or you can have like a costly, hard to fake version of virtue signaling, like, you know, the effective altruists I know who like actually give 30% of their income to charity and really put the money where the mouth is. So to me, virtue signaling is a neutral term. It's something all humans do, like all the time in almost every social, sexual, cultural context. It's a natural instinct. It's not something that's new. It's not something that's, you know, only done by the left or the right or whatever. But I think if we're aware of it, if we're aware of how it works, what makes it good or bad, what makes it cheap or costly, and if we're aware of, you know, what are we really trying to show off if we make a certain comment about some political issue? It's usually we're trying to show something about ourselves that might be socially relevant to people around us. Like we're not actually trying to solve the policy issue. 99% of Twitter, right, is just kind of that form of virtue signaling. And that's not to dismiss it or disparage it. It's just to say that's the kind of creature we are as a social primate.
Hey guys, underwear model and official alpha male hunk, Michael Malice here, and I want to talk to you about Sheath underwear, which is the underwear I wear every single day without fail, even somehow when I'm going commando. What makes Sheath underwear so great? Well, let me tell you. They've got this dual pouch system, which has one pouch for one part of your male anatomy, another part for another part of your male anatomy. And you put it on the first time, and you're like, this is kind of weird to have my underwear gripping me down there. But I'm going to tell you, it is the most comfortable underwear you're ever going to wear. It's great when it's hot outside. It's great when there's no sticking, no chafing. It keeps you nice and tight. These boxer briefs are the best. They've got some new additions. They got a mesh one. They got a bamboo one. And they have the limited edition Michael Malice Dynamite pair, which you're definitely going to want to wear. All you got to do is go to sheathunderwear.com and use promo code Malice, and you get 20% off, and you can get inside my pants, and you get one step closer to going higher on that alpha male hierarchy, which all my listeners like. Now, they also have a line for women, but since women don't listen to this show, that is of no relevance. All you got to do is go to sheathunderwear.com and use promo code Malice to get 20% off. Support the underwear that supports you and supports the show. Hey guys, you ever feel like you're being followed around the internet and maybe advertisers know a bit too much about you? Well, our sponsor, IPVanish VPN, is here to help you take back your privacy and help you become anonymous on the internet. What is it? IPVanish is a virtual private network, a VPN for short. It's a tool that helps you safely browse the internet. You can use a VPN on your computer, tablet, phone, things like your Fire Stick when you stream media. When you use a VPN, all your data is encrypted. What you're reading, what you're searching, what you're watching, whatever you're doing. And that's important because what you're doing is no one's business but yours. For listeners of the show, IPVanish is offering 65% off their annual plan. It's only $375 a month. IPVanish is super easy to use. You turn it on with one click. It runs in the background, helping to protect you while you're browsing the web. You run into a problem, no problem. IPVanish has 24/7 support by email, chat, and phone. Go to ipvanish.com/malice and use promo code malice. That's MALICE to claim your 65% off savings. Their annual plan is just $44.99 for the first year with our exclusive discount. This is the time to sign up. With our discount and their current promotion, you get a VPN for 65% off the usual offering. And IPVanish is the best of best. They've got a 4.7 out of 5 on Trustpilot with over 6,000 reviews. Remember, it's ipvanish.com/malice to get the deal and start protecting yourself online. Let's get back to the show. I always took it as meaning virtue. There's a difference between virtue signaling and virtue acting. So to me, virtue signaling implies the signal without the actual action, such as bring back our girls, the Ukrainian flag, as opposed to, let's suppose someone, corporations do this all the time. They donated $1 million to homeless shelter. That is virtue signaling in a sense, because obviously the motivation of the corporation is to look better and softer in the eyes of the populace. But at the same time, especially on an individual level, that, like you said, those effective altruists, they are putting their money where their mouth is. Do you think those two, I think that term, the umbrella term, combines both, but they seem to be different phenomena.
Yeah, and I'm kind of sloppy in the way I use this term also. Like on Twitter, I'll accuse people of virtue signaling as a shorthand for cheap talk.
Right. Okay.
Or like you're just signaling, but you're not actually doing anything. So it's a little bit of a slippery concept, but when I'm trying to be technical and precise, like I'm writing, journal papers about this or doing research on it, then it's really just about kind of any time or effort that you're investing in showing something off above and beyond what you're actually doing. And as it happens, most times that people do altruism towards strangers of any sort, giving to charity or volunteering in a soup kitchen or, going to work in Médecins Sans Frontières and save people in Africa, there's usually some mix of like real ethical behavior and a certain amount of signaling, to make it into a pretty package.
But does virtue signaling also count if someone does something virtuous just so they can see themselves as virtuous, so they can pat themselves on the back?
Yeah, exactly. I think a lot of this is self-signaling.
Okay, yeah.
Right. So you're doing something not necessarily to signal to others, but to signal to yourself, including your future self, to say, I'm a good person. I'm going to maintain my self-esteem and my image. And this will help like buffer me in the future against social criticism or against depression or, this is the bedrock of my self-esteem. And I think that's a legit thing to do also. And that can account for a lot of like truly anonymous charity donations where you're not signaling to anybody other than yourself in a way.
What ideas that you teach your students have gotten the most pushback? Like, what are they like freaking out about nowadays?
The existence of two biological sexes at the moment is kind of the big controversy. I teach,
Wait, can I interrupt you because I'm a zoology background. Are they literally at the point where even like the term sexual dimorphism is taboo, or are we getting there?
It's certainly getting taboo.
Okay.
Whenever you teach, let's say, a psychology of human sexuality course, like I've taught for 10 or 15 years, or an evolutionary psychology course, and you're like, okay, we're going to explore the origins of male and female and the origins of sexual reproduction going back, 1.2 billion years. And we're going to talk about the evolution of animals ever since the Cambrian explosion 540 million years ago, when like sexes started to diverge in terms of bodies and brains. You will get students raising hands, right? And saying this is some transphobic, neocolonialist bullshit, and it denies, it reinforces the gender binary, and it denies genderqueer people, and blah 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 blah.
Wait,
Even
are they like 1
even
second away
before
from?
you get to humans.
Are they so they're basically like saying I didn't come from no monkey? It's kind of that kind of thing.
Yeah, it's a neo-creationism.
Yeah.
And the really striking thing is that if you talk to like
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm just laughing at the idea of denying transgender trilobites. Like, how dare you?
I know how do we really know that they were male or female and not
Yeah.
just different body sizes? And um, I mean the tragic thing is, like, if you look at gender studies as a discipline back in the 80s, there were occasional efforts, good faith efforts, to engage with evolutionary biology. And people like Camille Paglia took biology seriously and took the evolution of
Oh yeah.
male and female sexes seriously, and like wove that into her feminism. I love that shit. Her book Sexual Personae actually had a big impact on my dissertation. But then that all got put to the side, to the extent that if you talk about like any of the other 6,000 species of mammals with a young gender studies professor, they'll treat that as like irrelevant and fascist. The focus is exclusively on humans,
Right.
right? Like, we have a theory that can explain male-female differences in humans. And then if you go like, what about like mammals, birds, reptiles? It's like, and they'll be like, that's not relevant. The whole biology of studying sex differences has been sexist, and therefore we can dismiss it.
Well, okay.
But as somebody who loves like plants and animals and biology, and loved going to the zoo as a kid, and if you care about the environment, like, how can you simultaneously say global warming's bad because it reduces biodiversity and all the wonderful species out there, but when it comes to studying gender, we're going to ignore all those species that we're trying to save?
One of the things I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this. I make this point many times is if you want to understand politics and human social behavior, don't read like John Locke or some conservative book about the founding fathers. Watch The Dog Whisperer, because human beings and dogs co-evolved and our behaviors are far more similar than most people would like. And then of course you hear people saying, oh, are you comparing people to dogs? Well, yes. And second, for most people, that's a positive comparison. If people were as virtuous and honest as dogs, I think we'd be a lot better of a world. Do you think that is kind of a more appropriate way to look at human behavior?
Oh, totally. And you know I lived in England for 9 years, and the interesting thing about English culture is everybody there watches BBC Natural History, and they love David Attenborough, and they watch Richard Dawkins, and they just soak up all this knowledge about animal behavior just from watching TV.
Yeah.
So you can be in London being driven around by a taxi driver and actually have a pretty good conversation about like the dynamics of sexual selection and the origins of sexual dimorphism. And they get it, like they've seen all the animal behavior. But in America, somehow we seem not to have as much exposure to that. And so you get sort of a whole generation who just don't see animal behavior as like at all relevant to understanding human behavior. And to me that's tragic, because like I think we're animals, and we have a little bit of overlay of culture and pretension and self-esteem and language and so forth. But um, I think the better you understand the biology, the more empowered you are politically.
Yeah, it's there's always that argument: are humans basically good or humans basically bad? And I always say human beings are basically animals. And if you look at what wild animals, let's say those chimps, which are far more violent than us, they go on these raids, they dismember other colonies, but they're also very caring and they groom one another, and the mom protects the kids and so on and so forth. We can get blood transfusions from chimps. That's how closely related we are. So it's you know I agree that being anti-science is bad. I mean, this is a term that's become politicized, but I'm someone who thinks that not only is science true, there's nowhere else to go really. Like, science just means the study of what is out there. So to kind of deny the basic animal, and I'm not using that term as a slur, obviously, nature of humanity seems to be on a level with astrology.
Yeah, and it gets especially sad because the less people know about animals, the more they underestimate animals, and the
Yeah.
more they're offended if you compare humans to other primates. But if you actually read the good research on primates, like by Franz de Waal or Chris Bohm or other people who've studied chimpanzees and bonobos, gorillas, orangutans, like you can understand a lot about human like dominance and submission and status hierarchies and power and influence and alliances and friendships by looking at those primates. But if you don't have any familiarity with what they're doing in their little chimp troops or bonobo troops, you can develop this sort of delusion that, oh, there was an ancient like egalitarian
Yeah. Right.
human tribe where everyone was strictly equal, and all hierarchy is like just an invention of post-agricultural, civilization.
Yeah, and which is also insane because there are many Stone Age Paleolithic tribes still extant on Earth, and a whole continuum from those who've never had contact with, let's suppose, Western civilization, like tribes on islands, as opposed to those who have some but still maintain their, I don't know if primitive's a slur, but not technologically advanced ways. So it's not even a mystery. We don't have to look at axe shards and cave paintings. We could actually see how these people live. So the idea that there's going to be this mass equality, you can't even have equality because at the very least you can have parents and children, and no one is going to argue that parents and children are going to live equally, and even within that you have the parents and you have the grandparents who are going to have some kind of differential status. So it's just nonsensical even on its face.
Yeah, and I've supervised some anthropology PhD students because we have like close associations in some universities between evolutionary psychology and evolutionary anthropology. And at University of New Mexico, we have a long-running anthro program to study the Tsimane tribal people in Bolivia, right, in South America. Decades of research. And I had one grad student go there to find out, could we do intelligence testing in the Tsimane? Will it predict anything? And she kind of took a nonverbal intelligence test called Raven's matrices and figured out, yeah, you can actually use this with Tsimane people. They're illiterate, they haven't gone to school, they don't have a market economy, but you can test them, you can get reliable data. And if you ask them who's intelligent in the tribe, they'll go, what's intelligent? We don't have a word for that. If you explain it, it means your head works well. You have a good brain. Then they go, oh, okay. Yeah, of course. That one has a good brain. That other person, not a good brain. And it correlates with their intelligence test on this, standardized Western test. And it also predicts their social status, their hunting ability, their reproductive success, etc. So, there again, the more you're familiar with actual like hunter-gatherers or pastoralists or foragers, the better you can appreciate modern society.
Hey guys, Your Welcome is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Let's face it, sometimes multitasking can be overwhelming. Like when your favorite podcast is playing and the person next to you is talking and your car fan is blasting, all while you're trying to find the perfect parking spot. But then again, sometimes multitasking is easy, like quoting with Progressive Insurance. They do the hard work of compare rates so you can find a great rate that works for you, even if it's not with them. Give their nifty comparison tool a try. You might just find getting the rate and coverage you deserve is easy. All you need to do is visit Progressive's website to get a quote with all the coverages you want, like comprehensive and collision coverage or personal injury protection. Then you'll see Progressive's direct rate, and their tool will provide options from other companies all lined up and ready to compare. So it's simple to choose the rate and coverages you like. Press play on comparing auto rates, quote at progressive.com to join the over 27 million drivers who trust Progressive. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and affiliates. Comparison rates not available in all states or situations. Prices vary based on how you buy. Guys, we got a different kind of sponsor for this episode. It's the Jordan Harbinger Show. It's a podcast you should really be listening to. Every day, someone tells you just have to listen to some podcast, and you nod and say, sure, sure, sure. You don't listen to it. Don't let that happen here. Jordan's Show, which Apple named one of its best of 2018, is aimed at making you a better informed, more critical thinker so you could get a sense of how the world actually works and come to your own conclusions about what's happening, even inside your own brain. Because each episode is a convo with a different fascinating guest. And when I say there's something for everyone here, I mean that. One episode, he's talking to a hostage negotiator from the FBI. Another episode, it's a cinematographer who discovered a lost city in the jungle. Jordan's always focusing on pulling useful, practical insights from his brilliant guests. Not talking about pop psychology or some self-help stuff. The episodes are loaded with bits of wisdom you can use to change your mind and improve your life right away. And if that's not worth checking out, I'm not sure what is. I know it isn't, and that's part of the problem. Total waste of time. We really enjoy this show, and we think you will as well. Search for the Jordan Harbinger Show. That's HARB as in boy, IN as in Nancy, GER on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you listen to podcasts. And the URL is jordanharbingershow.com/subscribe. On Apple Podcasts at jordanharbinger.com/iTunes. And if you want to learn more about Jordan, interesting guy, go to jordanharbinger.com/about. Let's get back to the show. Let's talk a bit about polyamory, because this is a radioactive topic, as I'm sure you're very familiar with. So what is your stance on the issue? And, let's talk a bit through this in the time we have left.
Sure. The way I think about this is humans evolved pair bonds. We developed a tendency for men and women to form long-lasting relationships, to pair up like a lot of socially monogamous birds do, right? For purposes of like sharing food, being hunters and gatherers who have a division of labor, and helping raise kids together for the long term. So human males evolved really unusual abilities to be good dads compared to other primates, other mammals. And we evolved capacities for like falling in love and having romantic commitments and having emotional commitments to our mates and forming these pretty strong pairs. But then, a few thousand years ago, this gets kind of ritualized into monogamous marriage, where you turn those original kind of primal pair bonds, which may or may not have been sexually exclusive, right? And which may have lasted a few years or a couple decades, but not necessarily for life. You turn that into the expectation. You should, pick a spouse in your 20s, get married, be sexually exclusive forever, for the rest of your life, raise kids together, never deviate from that. So people kind of confuse. They have two different meanings for monogamy. On the one hand, it can be like Christian, sexually exclusive, lifelong, formalized marriage.
Right.
On the other hand, sometimes they just refer to it to mean like the human tendency to form fairly long-term pair bonds. I believe in pair bonds. I'm in a pair bond. I've spent most of my adult life in pair bonds. Pair bonds are great. Polyamory and open relationships are a different way, in my view, of running your pair bond. It's not eliminating pair bonds. It's saying, let's negotiate explicitly, verbally, how much sexual exclusivity do we expect? To what degree are we comfortable interacting with former lovers? Are we comfortable, watching porn together or separately? Is it okay to flirt with other people in the workplace? Is it okay for us to have threesomes with other people, right? Let's negotiate it. I think what happens is you get a lot of conservatives,
right,
who hear polyamory and they think promiscuity. They can't distinguish between like a loving married couple with a pair bond who have a somewhat open relationship versus, a bunch of narcissistic New Yorkers running around on Tinder and having sex with everybody in a way that's completely deceptive, manipulative, irresponsible, irrational, etc. And I guess the longer I've I've thought about polyamory, the more I've thought of it in terms of trying to be radically honest within your pair bond or with your partner or partners about everything that's going on in your imagination, with your emotions, with your desires. I think a typical monogamous marriage, each spouse has a kind of great firewall where it's like, we can talk about certain things, our careers, our kids, etc., but I'm not going to ever share with my wife my porn use,
Okay.
my attraction to Hollywood stars or musicians, my fantasies about, other women in my workplace. I'm never going to talk about my exes ever in any positive way, no matter how significant and helpful and amazing growth experience they were. And I think what you end up with is a huge amount of self-censorship within relationships. It's kind of analogous to what you face with cancel culture in academia, right? And I think the tragedy of that is you end up with a lot of monogamous couples who never actually explicitly negotiate what counts as cheating. They never have the conversation. Is it cheating if I develop a crush on a particular movie star and I nudge us into like watching more of his or her movies? Is it cheating if I stay in contact with an ex on Facebook? Is it cheating if I watch a particular kind of porn? They never have that conversation. So then their relationship is full of surprises and betrayals and treachery because they never negotiated what the hell their expectations are.
But let me push back a little bit on this, because evolutionary psychology also teaches us that we're delusional when it comes to our own desires and wants. So one of the big arguments, like you were saying, the guy on Tinder, man and a woman in a relationship, he wants to spread his seed as much as possible, or at least have as much sex as possible. She wants to have that pair bond lock him down, right? So in her head, she's got three choices. One is they have that monogamous relationship where no one's having any kind of sexual behavior with anybody else. The second option is he gets what he wants, where she sees him primarily, but at the same time, he kind of cheats around and she's allowed to, that she doesn't really want to. And third is the relationship breaks up, right? So those are her 1, 2, and 3. Now, she will tell herself that she's happy with 2 because it's objectively happier than 3, which is in the relationship, but she's not able to have number 1, what she wants. And maybe she tells herself she doesn't really want that, because maintaining that deception that she wants to is what she needs to do to maintain the relationship. I mean, can you see how that could be a valid criticism?
Oh yeah, and look, there's a huge number of ways to do polyamory really, really badly.
Okay.
It's a high risk, high gain strategy, and I think most people aren't very well suited to it because they don't have the kind of honesty with themselves or the authenticity or the willingness to be explicit about their desires with other people, or they have some hidden agenda. Like, I'm going to pretend I don't want, this boyfriend to become my husband. I'm going to have like a secret agenda, but I'm not going to articulate it. And then it doesn't happen, and then you're disappointed, and then you move on to the next boyfriend, same thing happens again. And it's obvious that like current American culture is not succeeding in helping people find good partners,
Right.
effectively early in life, leading people to get married and having kids. It's not as if the current system is either actually monogamous or effective at producing happily married people.
Right.
So, in my mind, there's kind of 3 major options. There's like the promiscuity, Tinder-based, like treat everybody as disposable sex object system. There's more of like a trad life, get monogamously married as early as possible and disparage everybody who's doing promiscuity or polyamory. And then there's a poly system that says, what if we tried to be radically honest with our lovers, however many of them there are, about what we really want, and negotiate that, and maybe try to develop some new social norms around how to do that optimally.
But I think the disconnect is that you want to give your partner what they want, but at the same time you want different things, and men and women inherently are going to want different things, and that in and of its nature is going to create a disconnect, or someone's going to be left holding the bag, it seems like.
Well, the sexes do tend to want different things and pursue somewhat different mating strategies, for sure. But often you get situations where, let's say, a married woman would actually quite like to have a sort of semi-romantic male friend. Maybe there's some coworker, neighbor, somebody who does some like hobby or sport that she enjoys. And she'd like to be able to have feelings for him, but husband's so jealous, right, and so afraid of being called a cuck or whatever, that he says, no, you're not allowed to have any emotionally significant relationships with anybody else of the opposite sex ever. That can feel very constraining to a lot of women, right? She doesn't necessarily want to go out and have a bunch of casual sex with a lot of partners. But a lot of women do have kind of a thirst for, like, it would be nice to be able to be a little more romantically or emotionally intimate, both with other men and even with other female friends. And so being a little bit more open can kind of scratch that itch as well. And as Dan Savage, who does Savage Love podcast, says, like, just because you have an open relationship doesn't mean you blow the doors off the relationship. It can be a little bit open, and you can kind of negotiate how open it is.
Yeah, but then the other risk, and I'm sure you're familiar with this question, is once it's almost inevitable, and I think this is of both genders. People say it's just a female thing. It's not. When you are physically intimate with people, after a while, you're going to catch the feels, and that becomes a whole other situation.
I think it depends how much experience you've got.
Okay.
Okay. In the polyamory subculture, there's this term NRE, new relationship energy. And that's a way of kind of talking about, getting a crush on someone, or like you have sex with them and you feel kind of emotionally close to them. And like ordinary people might say, oh no, I've fallen in love with someone.
Yeah. Right.
And they make a big deal out of it. And like, should I leave my wife? Should I leave my husband? Oh no, I feel love. This is terrible. This is sinful. In poly, you go, yeah, I have feels. I have NRE with this person, but I don't necessarily need to take it that seriously, right? Once you go through a few of those NRE experiences and you realize, yeah, it lasts a while, it can be pretty intense. It leads you to kind of like overestimate how good this new person is compared to your existing mate. If you can learn not to get swept up in the NRE, and if your spouse learns, oh, just because my husband or wife feels NRE does not mean the end of the world. It doesn't mean we need to get divorced. It doesn't mean there's like a cosmic betrayal. They can have the confidence, after a while, oh yeah, this is like the 5th time he's experienced NRE in the last 5 years. He always comes back to me because we have a mortgage and kids and he loves me more than anybody else. That can actually create a stronger pair bond where you're not worried all the time, oh, my husband could fall head over heels with someone and then not be able to remember the significance of our marriage.
This is Walk-Ins Welcome with Bridget Fetisi.
I love hearing people's stories of resilience and grit. This is why I created this podcast.
We are very excited to welcome Jim Gaffigan, Yasmin Mohammed, Glenn Beck, Tim Dillon, Abigail Schreier, Jeff Garland, Ayan Hirsi Ali, Sam Harris, Heather Hying, Jonah Goldberg, Ben Shapiro, Glenn Greenwald, Sarah Shahi, Colin Quinn.
If there's a culture of victimhood, then let's tell stories of grit and survival.
Subscribe and listen now on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Let's get back to the show. Here's the other question I can hear people saying right now, which is, this is part of a decades-long attack on the nuclear family, which has been, we've been told that dads don't matter. Single moms are just as good as having both parents. Now we're going to have Heather has 2 mommies. Now Heather's going to have 2 mommies and 3 daddies. And this is a conscious attack on the nuclear family, which is the basis of Western civilization? I'm sure you've heard that many times, so I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
I think that's about 50% accurate.
Okay.
There is certainly, I would be lying if I said like that there's not an element of poly subculture that is extremely radical sexually. There certainly are polyamorous people who are very much woke, very much LGBTQ focused, anti-nuclear family, pro-single motherhood, anti-natalist, like babies suck because they interfere with our threesomes, etc. Right?
Oh, God. Okay.
There's certainly that element to it. But to me, like I actually gave a talk at Hereticon in Miami, this big conference of heterodox thinkers, that was about trad poly, which is like, how can you have polyamory that is pro-pair bond, pro-marriage, pro-natalist, like pro-family values, but just means you're a little bit more open sexually than the traditional ideal monogamous marriage. Would that help? I think the burden is very much on the polyamory community to make the case that poly is consistent with like creating the next generation and raising good kids and having stable families. The burden of proof is on them. On the other hand, it's important to compare like realistic marriages as they actually happen to realistic poly as it actually happens. And there's a lot of American marriages that are unhappy, sexually frustrated, dead bedrooms, aren't having kids, people aren't getting married early enough, getting divorced, getting remarried, getting divorced again. So it's not as if monogamous marriage, as people actually practice it, is working that well either. So I just think it's good to explore alternatives. We might find in 20 years, right? We might find empirically poly doesn't work very well. Open relationships are less stable, less happy, et cetera. We could find that. I'm doing empirical research to address this. But I think we need to try it out, do the research, see what works.
One of my pet peeves is much of what conservatives preach is entirely ahistorical. One of the idea that kind of, the founding fathers were all these kind of saints. Most educated conservatives don't say that with straight face, to be fair. But one of my pet peeves is this valorization of the nuclear family and the claim, as opposed to the extended family, and the claim that this is something that has been going on for centuries, as opposed to recent, particularly post-World War II American phenomenon. What are your thoughts on this kind of idea that, the nuclear family is the best thing since sliced bread?
I think you're right. I think I wish we spent at least 10% as much effort trying to save the extended family as we spend trying to save the nuclear family. Because there are like some serious issues about extended families. At the moment, my wife Diana and I are living near her parents and her brother here in Georgia because we value extended family and we want, to maintain those ties. But the American corporate system of kind of shuffling workers around to different cities and expecting, of course, you should move away from home to college and then move somewhere else for grad school and move somewhere else for your career, absolutely nukes the extended family ties. And it's weird because, the hunter-gatherer tribes we talk about, it's all organized around extended families. Like, what your siblings are near you, you see your nieces and nephews, you know your uncles and aunts, you're all mutually supportive. But there's a lot of aspects of current American culture and economics that undermines the extended family in ways that don't seem to get much attention.
Let's quickly talk that book you wrote with Tucker about mate and about how, what advice, this is a very broad question, but, and I'm sure you go on for hours, but what advice would you give young males, maybe some counterintuitive advice that would maximize their ability to land a quality mate? And I'm sure a lot of that speaks to becoming a quality mate themselves.
The mate book was great fun to to write, and it was really helpful when Tucker Max and I did the Mating Grounds podcast also, which was like about 200 episodes. Guys would call in with questions. I have this issue, help, and we'd give advice. And that really helped us to get calibrated about what problems young men were facing, at least as of like 2015 or so. It's not that different now. Some of the advice was super straightforward, like wear clothes that fit, wear shoes that are made of leather and that are like could last at least 3 months. Get in shape. Here's how to get in shape. Here's what to eat. Here are the exercises to do. But the general message was understand that women are very perceptive. They can judge an awful lot about your cognitive abilities, your intelligence, your verbal fluency, your personality traits, your mental health. They can judge an awful lot from just 1 hour of face-to-face conversation. And so it's really hard to fake mate value. It's hard to fake mate value. So work on everything that you can improve, and that often starts with a foundation of physical health, and then work on your mental health, like be confident and happy, and don't just fake it, like do the things that make you confident and happy, and you will be attractive.
But I got to interrupt because like telling someone be confident, it's like that Simpsons joke, get confident, stupid. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, confidence and happiness are things that I think almost all of us aspire to achieve. Like it's easier said than done. What techniques could people use to become confident and happy?
Yeah, well, you got to buy the book and read it.
Okay, fair enough.
Like, for example, but your point is well taken. Happiness and confidence are outcomes of good habits and of acquiring actual skills. So with social confidence, for example, we say, like, if you spend all your time home alone playing video games and not having any actual conversations with people, and then you go on a date and you're completely out of practice having conversations, your conversational skills have atrophied and you will not be impressive to women. So you should like have male friends you talk with regularly. You should call your mom once a week and at least talk to your mom. If you go to Starbucks, talk to the barista, at least for a minute. Get in that verbal fluency habit. And what I see with a lot of undergrads is they're so used to texting and they're so frightened of actual face-to-face conversations that when they meet somebody for, even the most casual date, they're like petrified. Like, how do my tongue and lips even work anymore? So cultivating that is not, it's just a habit. You gotta do it. What I see a lot in the manosphere and the pickup artists and the red pill guys is a lot of very bad advice. Very bad advice that says basically you have to get jacked and ripped and you have to get big muscles and you have to do CrossFit and you have to be physically impressive and like do MMA. All that is great, right? But that's not necessarily what I'd start with. They have the impression that like women care more about that stuff than you can possibly imagine.
It's really, I had to learn this. I did an underwear ad last year. Got in such good shape, right? And it is completely, there is no other field where the amount of effort you put in has such little rewards as getting in shape in terms of finding women being attracted. As long as you're like at a certain level and not a complete mess, you're fine. And at a certain point, and literally every woman I've talked to agrees with this, at a certain point, it becomes deleterious because then you either come off as gay or vain, or, when guys get really fit, they get veins everywhere. And that's like a sign of accomplishment in that world. No woman finds vascularity attractive. They find it repulsive. But it's this complete binary between what is considered desirable in a fitness context as opposed to what women are looking for. And if you look at professional bodybuilders who are like the apex of that and look at who they're dating, they're not dating J-Lo or the Mr. Olympia does not have, Miss America as his wife.
Yeah, I think what young men are doing is they're confusing what kind of physique looks formidable and intimidating to me as a warrior,
Yeah.
where I'd be frightened of them, like the Spartans in the movie 300, right? Young men are very interested in that, not because they're gay, but because they realize, well, that's what an effective warrior looks like. I want to be an effective warrior. That's dominant. That's high status. But that's not necessarily what women are most attracted to. So they're confusing sexual attraction with like warfare formidability. So what can you do that's better? Like Tucker Max and I recommend stuff like work on your sense of humor, man. Like take some improv comedy classes. Try to be funny with your male friends. Be lighter and warmer when you talk to women.
Yeah.
Instead of just like bragging and being 100% earnest. Particularly learn to make fun of yourself in a way that is confident rather than kind of submissive. It's like I understand myself so well to know my strengths and weaknesses, and I can make fun of my weaknesses because I'm, confident enough in my overall value. And I think women and men respond to that like very, very positively, partly because it's like a really good indicator of overall mental health if you can make fun of yourself.
That's really interesting that you said that, because I do that. I never realized that's why I was doing it. I always say that I'm significantly shorter than I am, and I always say that I'm significantly older than I am. And of course, given social media, people take these things at face value, which delights me to no end. But I didn't realize that is what I was doing. It's a function of confidence and laughing at supposed weaknesses, which are not ages. It might be weakness in certain contexts, and that I don't have much of a lifespan left. But in other contexts, it's kind of irrelevant.
Yeah, and like when I'm teaching, I try to model this to students. And like if I don't know something, somebody asks a good question, I don't know, I will always say, man, I don't know. Guess I'm just kind of a dumbass. I'll try to look it up for next class. And if I'm talking about research I've done, and I know what the limitations of my research are,
Sure.
I'll kind of make fun of them. Like, here's why our sample size wasn't bigger than it was. Like, here's the measure we should have used, but we didn't. Like, if you're radically honest about that stuff, it's a lot more engaging to students, but I think it also shows them you can be whatever, a relatively high status college professor, but not take yourself too seriously.
And I think that also imparts a huge amount of trust, because this person it's just like with animals. When the dog shows you his belly, his vulnerability, that is also a sign of trust, as opposed to a sign of aggression, and it creates a bond between the two actors.
Yeah, and God, I wish more politicians did this. I wish Elizabeth Warren would be like, oh man, fuck, I don't understand Bitcoin. I'm sorry, I just don't. I wish I did. My staffers try.
All
That would
she
be
thinks
so
of it
refreshing.
she thinks of it as wampum.
I don't know what she thinks, but I wish we could have a political culture where the leaders and the journalists could be just a little bit lighter,
Yeah.
and more self-deprecating and funnier about all this stuff. And that sense of humor, I mean, it's why Trump won in 2016. The whole meme wars
Yeah.
back then. It's just a bunch of shit posting and weird images, and it works because it's like the radical act of not taking the existing power structures at face value and being willing to mock them relentlessly.
Dr. Miller, we're running out of time. What has been your favorite part of this interview?
I love talking about the animals and natural history stuff, and people just, so your listeners, they should listen to all your podcasts, but then they should go to their local zoo and watch the animals and watch the mating and appreciate the sex differences, and just realize we're just not that different from what you see out in those other species.
You are welcome.
Stream the biggest movies and TV shows for free on Pluto TV. Watch movies like Titanic and G.I. Joe: The Rise of Cobra, plus TV shows like CSI and Star Trek: The Next Generation. Starting this month, check out the 24/7 Stargate channel exclusively on Pluto TV. Plus hundreds of channels and thousands of movies and TV shows absolutely free. Download the free Pluto TV app on your favorite streaming device and start watching today.